Thank you very much. I gotta say, if anyone here is lost and they're here for tantric yoga, you're in the wrong place. So now is the time to leave. Nobody? Okay, we're all here for rewilding. Okay, good. Where do I start? Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me. I really want to thank the organizers. This has been a great weekend. I've met so many like-minded people, and it's very refreshing because in Ireland, let's just say I'm a bit of a pariah, where it seems like I wouldn't be such a pariah around here. Certainly, everybody eats the same food as me. That's always a plus. So, to give you a little bit of context, have you heard of the term rewilding? Is this a term that you guys have heard in Austria? So in case you don't know what that term is, I'm gonna treat everybody like they're stupid. So apologies if you're not stupid, or if you have never heard of any of this stuff. There is not a translator, so I will talk really fast and you won't understand. And it's probably better for you anyway. If you don't understand half the stuff I'm saying, you'd be like most of the women in my life. So rewilding. Rewilding is the restoration of land through natural cycling. That means land allowed to express itself through plant or animal actions to its own benefit. They put a little hyphen there. Not human benefit, although humans can benefit. We are part of a very complex system. We are not individuals. That is that American bullshit that you keep getting told. That the American dream, we are the rock stars of our own movies. No, we are not. We are part of a system. We are part of humanity, and humanity is part of a bigger system. The problem that we have is that we think of ourselves as individuals. But when COVID came, everybody was sad. No, I don't have any friends. Banana bread is boring, and oh, Netflix. That's the problem. We ourselves have become so alienated from nature that we no longer even know what nature is. By the way, I'm going to explain the pictures. This is not some screensaver from Windows 95. This is actually pictures of the rewilding. So I'm not very good at technology stuff, hence why it takes you 3 weeks to get an email response from me. And I work with a whole bunch of old fellas, and they don't even understand how phones work. So you can imagine it's a little tricky at my place. So anyway, bit of context. My family are the oldest family in Ireland. We have been in Ireland for 950 years. Another 50 years, you could almost consider us native. I assure you, we're very invasive. So we came as Normans. So, by the way, if you don't like what I'm saying, that's totally fine. This is democracy, apparently. And but if you are going to hurl insults because you don't like where I'm from, because I'm one of the landed gentry, or evil landlords, as I'm commonly referred to, it's French bastard, not English bastard. I come from Norman descent, not English descent. So in Ireland, people get confused, but I know you guys are probably way more educated than some of us. So anyway, we come from a hunting background. Our land is on the borderlines of the Pale. The Pale was the area around Dublin that the Normans came, and they cultivated, and they cut down all the trees, and they made farmland because it was very, very healthy, very strong, good land. And they became farmers. My family was no different. We came, we took over an area called Dunsany. Now, Dunsany means lowland in Irish. Don't ask me about other Irish words, because I don't speak Irish, I speak English. So anyway, been in my family for 950 years. Now, my family is a little different than a lot of those titled folk that you commonly hear. We're like the samurai, you see. We have ideas. And we've always believed that privilege is not free. You can get born with privilege, you can get born with an advantage, but that means you have the privilege to do something for your people. That is a lesson that since I was this big, my parents said to me, there is no such thing as a free lunch. You're getting something that others would kill for. Make it count. Now the problem was, I was bottom of the class. Smoked a lot of weed. Was more interested in my biceps and the girl next to me than I was in anything natural. In fact, I didn't like the countryside. No, in fact, I didn't like vegans. I would say, Hey, where do you get your protein, man? Anyone get that? Yeah, that was probably me. So when people said the word vegan, I thought, oh, those little people that like are starving to death, waving signs. Never did I think my whole life would change and I would become Lord Vegan. But anyway, you couldn't write that shit down. So my family were hunters. We were farmers. In fact, my grandfather was such a successful cattle farmer that he would have over 1,000 head of cattle back in his heyday. And now my grandfather, he loved a little bit of drinking. Oh, we Irish, we love drinking anyway, but my grandfather really liked drinking. So he'd drink whiskey for breakfast. He'd have a little bit with his milk and occasionally some white bread, mostly the whiskey though. And he would sell his cattle and he'd get lots of money, and he was known as the rich land baron with the cattle. And my grandfather would look at the checks because he liked the look of the numbers. And the more he drank, the better the numbers got. And the only problem was he'd get so drunk he'd forget where he put the check. So when he died, we found a lot of checks that were never cashed. So a few years ago, my father took over. And my father believed in something else. My father was not a hunter. He didn't like animal cruelty. He liked preservation. He liked conservation. He wanted to do something else. We were farmers, you see. This is how we have to make money. Sometimes you're born in a situation you can't quite get out of. And that's just the way we've done things. It's how we do. And my father didn't want to do things with chemicals. He wanted to do organic, because organic was the big thing. Organic farm. You'd make lots of money. Could be great. Organic farm. So we tried the organic thing. My father got very, very sick, neurological disease. And like a true Irish family, we all worked together to keep him alive. Every day was torture. Money was difficult. Time was difficult. But my dad's dream was to have an organic farm. So I said, fine, I'll carry this dream. So we tried the organic thing. I had cattle. First day I got cattle, you know what I saw? They arrived and their heads were bleeding. Do you know why? The farmer who had sold them to me had dehorned them. Now, when you dehorn cattle, which is already a barbaric thing, you generally do it when they're young. These weren't that young. So I spent a good amount of time up close, this guy who didn't like the countryside, having to clean heads of these tortured animals. And you know what I realized? These things have souls. We're supposed to be civilized, and this is what the civilized people do. Imagine that. Isn't this bullshit? Because if we're so civilized, if we want all these things, if we want equality, and this is what we do, what does that really say about us? So I didn't like that. And then as time went on, we did a couple of years of farming, and it just got worse and worse. It kept playing, because those cattle were eventually sold. And I know where they went. And they had names. I named them. And the day it came, and a little piece of me went, this isn't right. And I used to remember my place, that I hated it so much, because you know what? I used to remember the summer times when I'd hear the sheep crying because they were separated from their mums. Civilized. This is what we do. This is what civilized people do. And then one day came the dreaded day where my farming partner came to me and said, the land is tired, needs chemicals. And I said to myself, now I'd been swallowing pills, knowing that I was doing harm, but we needed to survive, didn't we? And that farmer came to me and said, we need chemicals. I'm like, but wait a minute, we're organic. Organic is a pipe dream, he said. Their land needs management. This estate needs management, otherwise you will lose it. Now that was the moment. The moment I said to myself is like, if this is what it takes to survive, then I'd rather go extinct. So I said to myself, today is the day we change. So I told my scared mother, and I said to her, I looked at her in the face, you're going to say yes to a man who sprays chemicals, and our father died of a neurological disease that was probably caused by chemicals. And my poor elderly mother looked at me and goes, no, we shouldn't do that. And I said, we're going to do something else. And I told the farmer, we're not going to do that anymore. We've decided we're going to do something else. And then he looked at me and said, what do you mean? I'm like, we're going to do something different. We're going to do a regeneration project. We're going to allow the land to recover because, like your body, if you tire it out, it heals. We had been taking from the land, right? So clearly, if we allow nature to take its course, eventually nature will replenish itself. And he looked at me and he was like, is this a tax dodge? Because I would be interested in that. No, not a tax dodge. We are going to do nature conservation now. But he said to me, the last thing he said to me as I walked out of the room, but the land will be ruined. That was the last conversation we had. So the problem is, if you were to let land go wild, and everybody told me not to, because it was a disaster. You see, you have to understand that my farm is one of the most valuable farms in the country. It has perfect land for producing food. It is what they call productive. And here I was, taking all the animals off the land, and I'm going to leave it for the birds and the bees. Yeah, that didn't go down well. And my own family, who are, should we say, fairly bourgeoisie. Do you know this term, bourgeoisie? Meaning they are the fat of the land, those people that you probably hate. My brothers and sisters are a bit like that. I'm the hippie black one, the black sheep of the family. So we went forward. We were going to do nature conservation. Now, I had no idea about nature. Didn't even really like nature, to be perfectly honest with you. Preferred concrete. I liked death metal. I liked those things. They didn't have any of that in the countryside. So, okay, gonna learn to love it. So we allowed the land to recover. The first thing that happened, noxious weeds everywhere. And the farmer said to me, oh, you're gonna have to do something about that. Like, you can get fined by that. So I said to my oldest employee, and he's an old guy called Dennis Toomey. He remembers with the pyramids being built, he was so old. And I rolled up to him like that. And I said, Dennis, how's it going? You right? And I was like, yeah, do you remember back in the old days when the pyramids were being built? How did you get rid of all these noxious weeds? What? One more time. We pull it. What's wrong? Oh, you'd pull it. Right, cool. Okay, this is enough of this conversation. Dennis didn't like to shower very much. In fact, he believed that dirt could just crackle off you. And he did. Anyway, so I said, fine. I have a 200-acre field in front of me. By the way, I know you guys are all from the mainland and you don't do acres. So just for some context, an acre is a football pitch. So 200 football pitches, right? So I got out there and I started pulling these weeds with my bare hands. Now, these are not hands of hard labor. Posh kid, remember? Posh kid. So I went to my kitchen looking for workman's tools because apparently this is a farm. No workman's glove. I found one, smelt of pee, so I didn't really use that one. But we do our own washing up. So I got pink gloves. And I went. Headphones and black metal t-shirt. I'm going to pull all the weeds of this 200-acre field. My employees are these old Irish guys, and they just looked at me like, that one's crazy. And I went there like a rice farmer, pulling all the weeds. The only problem was, nobody told me that the more you pull, the worse it gets. So I began to pull, and my back was sore, and I thought, well, listen, for nothing else, I'm going to have great biceps this Christmas, and the girls are going to go wild. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to have it was the era of MySpace where you could actually take like bicep poses and not be considered a creep. Facebook killed all of that. But anyway, I was like, great. Unfortunately, after 6 months of pulling, the only thing I got were a few pokes from certain gay men, and that wasn't really going to work for me. So it didn't really work out. So I said the next year, I was like, you know what? I'm bored. I'm not going to do this again. I'll wait till the council sends me a shitty letter. And they never did because it's Ireland. And the council has tea breaks every hour. So not going to get too much work done. So the first year, it was bad. Weeds everywhere. Everything the farmer told me that would happen would happen. The second year, it was worse. The weeds were getting weeds on them. The third year, my field had no more grass in it. It was just weeds. And by the fourth year, it looked like an apocalypse. In fact, the weeds were so yellow that if you looked at it from space, you would think I'm the best rapeseed farmer in the county. And then the 5th year came. And then it got much better. And then by the 6th year, it was completely gone. The land had turned into this wild green grass. And a whole bunch of new things came. Insects brought birds. First it was the common birds, then it was rarer birds, then it was the birds of prey. The more insects we had, the more birds. The birds brought seeds, because the more they ate, the more they deposited. How does you know this term biodiversity? Have you heard of that before? That is a bullshit term, by the way. That is a man-made term. Biodiversity is something that we invented. And it usually is a kind of idea that, oh, the more variance we have, the better. When people talk about variance, we're not talking about balance. You know, I've always been a big fan of Chinese medicine. They always talk about balance. Variance don't necessarily equate balance. So, but what, anyway, I digress. The point is that the more birds we got, the more insects we got, and then we got birds of prey, and then we got more animals, and the animals came. We got one new animal a year at first. And it was brilliant, because most of these animals I had never seen. My father and I had a conversation once, and I asked him once, how come there are no animals in Dunsany? Well, they suffered as a cost to our success in farming. The animals paid the price. And it was true, because when I used to walk out the door, all I'd hear were crows. And I always used to associate that place with misery, and crows calling me, knowing that I was going to die soon. That's how I looked at it. Yes, I'm a goth. I appreciate that. But now I could take my headphones off, and in between listening to Cannibal Corpse, I could hear birds singing. Sometimes I preferred the Cannibal Corpse, to be perfectly honest with you. But anyway, the birds had sung. This whole new bunch of animals had turned up. But the problem was, and here's the problem, this was vegan. No more killing. But vegan is only the first step. You see, we had to change. I began to think about things. You ever seen The Lion King? I love The Lion King. You know, everything the light touches, all that sort of stuff, right? So he's got the scene where he's lifting the little lion, kind of like Michael Jackson with the baby. Do you remember? Anyway, that. And he says, talks about the circle of life. Now, what is the circle of life? I know this sounds like really obvious stuff, but sometimes you're surprised how many people forget this. The circle of life, you're born. If you're a plant, you grow. Then you flower. If you're a person, you get good looking. Then you get old and grumpy like me. And then you get really old and grumpy and nobody is your friend anymore. And then you die. And this is the bit that we always get wrong. You have to rot. And I'm not meaning it in some abrasive way, like you have to rot. Because let's look at farming now. We put things into the land. We let things grow. We don't allow any sharing, no insects, no animals eating. No, that's for us. And then we take everything. And then just as things are about to break down, where we have expiration, we till land. So land never has a chance, not one chance to recover. So you don't have a circle, you have a C. And you know what C stands for? It stands for crap. And that's what we got, crap. So what we started was something else. Land was going to rejuvenate itself by going through the circle. Yin yang, as they say. And you know what the essence of nature's association, what the essence of how we in nature have to rise? It has to be give and take. I'm not saying that we all have to live in mud huts and we all have to sit there and not walk on grass. We are humans. We are part of our ecosystem. But we are one part of our ecosystem. What is the basis of any relationship? Give and take. You want to get divorced? Try a relationship where it's all take. I'm pretty sure there's quite a few people here who've been in those relationships, right? A couple of divorced people here, I'm sure. No? Too young. Probably don't believe in divorce anymore. Anyway, if you just take, you'll end up with no television and half a couch. And I can tell you it's very hard to watch The Simpsons with half a couch. You'll get all kinds of back problems. It's not a good look. So we have to give and take. So the philosophy at Dunsany created something. We started allowing, when trees fell down, half the trees would be allowed to be used for firewood or for things that we would use for this castle. The other things would be left for nature. When we took something, we allowed it. We stopped managing. That was the other thing. No more managing. The trees, they die, good, they stay dead. They fall, tough titty. We began to allow nature to have its run of the place. Nobody, I went more extreme than that though. Oh, I went full bonkers. So what we did, we didn't allow people to cross the ground because I began to watch the animals, these animals that I had been so annoyed by for so long because I didn't give a shit. I was to watch them. And you know what happens when you chase deer? They all run in single file. And if you follow deer, and you know, any hunters here? Any former hunters here? I know there's nobody hunting. The only hunting you're doing is for the tofu, right? I'm sure that's pretty much only here. But if you are a hunter, you learn how to track an animal, right? And deer, they walk in single file. In fact, they're very predictable because they will always use the same things. Now, I'm half Brazilian, probably my Latin side, yeah? And in my mom's culture, in Brazil, the natives, they walk in single file through the jungle, and they're able to walk absolute bollock naked and not get eaten by snakes. Where me, well, if I walked in the Amazon, I'd be a cheeseburger with extra cheese. I wouldn't survive 2 minutes. And these guys walk barefoot, walk in single file. So I said, you know what? We're going to take a page out of that. We're going to start walking single file. So for 9 months of the year, you're not allowed to cross my land. In fact, we only have one track in, one track out. The idea is we allow a minimalist effect on nature because the biggest disturbance of nature is what? People pushing prams, people stomping on things. So by limiting our movement, we were giving opportunities for animals to nest and stuff. And that's one of the reasons we had such an explosion of wildlife. But then came a problem. Deer. Oh, yeah, I'm sure you've heard all about the hunters telling you got to kill deer. Well, the problem is I'm vegan, number one. So no killing deer, even if I'm wrong. Tough. No killing. You cannot build something on blood. We've tried that for thousands of years, and where are we today? Look at the world today. We've built it on blood, and it ain't working. So I said, okay, we're not going to kill the deer. But the problem is deer do destroy forests. They do stop regeneration. And for years, the first few years, my forests were bare. Every little sapling that would grow, they would be gone, annihilated. That's not a deer, by the way, just in case you didn't know the difference. Anyway, so I said to myself, fine, we're going to have to plant trees. You know, the trees are growing. I'm going to plant trees. I'm going to be one of them tree huggers you read about. So I got 1,000 trees, and I started planting them. Now, I don't like plastic much either, so I would plant them around without the plastic tubing. 1,000 trees, and I was like, oh, yeah, baby, look at me, booyakasha. So the only problem was, by the weekend, all my trees were eaten. And I would sit at my window like that scene in The Shining, where your man's just I'm staring at deer, going, you bastards. I planted 1,000 trees, and you fat bastards, I ate all my trees, and I'm protecting you guys. But then I noticed something else. I began to notice that the forests were regenerating. And the new saplings were coming in, and the deer were not eating those. And that was very strange, because I couldn't understand it. Because everywhere I read, every piece of information that I read said, you got deer, you got to fence off the land. Now, I didn't fence shit. All I did was watch these things eat. And I was watching. And the more time went by, the more the forest started regenerating. And yet, every time I planted, gone. And then I heard something, I read something by a Dr. Susan Simard, who mentioned a very interesting thing. Mycelium. Have you heard of mycelium? In case you haven't, mycelium is the World Wide Web. It is the internet for fungus. Under the ground are thousands, millions of different fungus. And they are the highway of communication between plants and animals and everything. And in fact, when we move through land, we are creating signals. Now, these are not necessarily signals that we ourselves are able to interpret, but the plants are able to interpret. And in fact, the mother trees, for example, are able to recognize their young because they send pulses and carbon through these tentacles. And they are able to recognize their own. And as a result, they are able to give off smells and tastes that can ward off grazing predators. So that's very interesting. I read that and I thought to myself, wait a minute, this is kind of what's happening. Because every time I planted a tree, they would get gone. And yet these were happening. These were protected. They were now quadrupled the deer because I hadn't been killing. And I thought to myself, let me do a little bit of experiment. So I went to the forest and I got myself a shovel. And I dug up 9 oak saplings. And I grew them for a little bit in the same soil that I dug up. And then after a few months, I planted 3 in one forest, in between naturally seeded oaks, 3 in another forest, between naturally seeded oaks, and 3 in a third forest, between naturally seeded oaks. And then I went away, had a cappuccino, watched some friends, came back. All 9 of my oaks were eaten, but the oaks on either side, untouched. That's when I realized Dr. Simard was absolutely correct. Because what happens when you dig something out of the ground? When you stick a shovel in the ground, you are severing the connections that the mycelium has. When you plant a tree, it could take months, it could take years before those connections are forged. That plant is outside the system, and thus it has no protection from the system. So, this was an interesting fact. So now we took a survey with Trinity College. We have now all our forests in perfect regeneration. And we have double the natural tree regeneration than we ever did before. And now I have quadruple, getting on 5 times the amount of deer. My neighbors, however, do not have the same benefit. That's one thing. So, that was bizarre. And I thought, right, mycelium's the cool thing that I heard about. So I began walking. And I began walking the land and I began studying the reactions. Because the biggest criticism about vegan rewilding, you get it from a group of people called the regenerative grazing lobby. Let me explain a little bit about them. The regenerative grazing lobby are under the idea that land needs to be grazed for it to have its natural functions. This is not completely untrue, but I believe it's largely overstated. So, like the Nep estate that was previously mentioned, their main thing is grazing. Because by putting pigs and cattle and all kinds of things, they are continuously doing what we've already done. You see, they're not really solving a problem, they're doing a low-fat option. And that's bullshit. Because the reality of it is, if we want to change what we've done to the planet, we have to first accept ownership of what we've done and then change from the foundation up. Because that's the only real way we make radical change. And I quickly realized that this regenerative grazing, although sounding good, didn't fit well with my vegan ethics because ultimately it ends in a slaughterhouse. And I don't believe nature ever wanted slaughterhouses. And I thought to myself for a while, how did we get here? Because I became vegan, and one of the main things that sold me about vegan, I don't know if you guys are the same, but the biology was something that sold me. You know, it wasn't the guy with the slaughterhouse footage. No, it was, you haven't got claws. You see color. You like this taste of salt, sour and sweet. Let's break that down for a moment. So you like sugar because that's what like fruit is. How do you take your steak? Oh, I used to say, onions, mushrooms. Oh, so plants. Oh, and pepper. Yeah, plants is shit. Yeah, I guess I do like it, plants. So we see color. Why? Other animals don't see color. We see color. So we can identify fruit and vegetation. We don't have claws, so we have no ability. In fact, monkeys and orangutans and stuff, they occasionally can eat meat. But it's not what they want to eat. In fact, they prefer to chew. So when did this problem start? It started when we had an evolutionary misstep. And here it comes really crazy stuff. So I hope you guys have some beers you can have after this, because you're going to want to drink after this. When we created fire, it was an evolutionary misstep. And I hate to say it. We are the only animal that created fire. And we created it by accident. And as a result of this creation, amazing things happened, and not lots of ones that we don't want to talk about. But what really happened? We created fire, and then as a result, we were able to eat more meat, which means we spent less time chewing, more time creating, more time eating things that perhaps we might have not eaten before. What's that old thing that people say? You are what you eat. So what happens if all you eat is an animal in fear, distress, nerves, pain? You know, they always used to say to me, eat too much tofu, you're going to get boobs, you're going to go feminine. And that scared me a while. But the truth is, that's nonsense. Eat fear every day and then wonder what it's going to do to your mind. Imagine what kind of fear, imagine what kind of mindset this will change over time. Imagine generations of eating the wrong foods over and over again. You know, you've heard of inflammation. What does inflammation do to the mind? There's no research that I've seen talking about how the relationship between inflammational states in the body has an effect on psychology. And now you look at ourselves. We are the only species that destroys its own environment in a negative way, even for ourselves. The only species I've ever even read about that can do that is a virus, and maybe we are. Or an evolutionary misstep. So how do you correct that? We have to start going towards nature, because the problem I had with regenerative grazing, and getting back to that, is a lot of those people are trying to go backwards. They're trying to go back to a time that didn't really exist. We are going to be living in mud huts, apparently. We can all be like these guys with spears and eating our pig on occasion. But that as a food system doesn't work. It doesn't even produce an adequate amount of calories. It's nonsense. It's a low-fat version of the animal industry that is destroying this planet. So I wasn't going to do that. But I did have a problem. And that was, what happens to the grass once it gets too rich? And I had no study that I could find. But what did happen was this. We began to see actions. If you are going to change, what are the three actions that could happen? You're going to have either the grass gets so rich that a grazer wants to eat it more. That's one. The next thing is, perhaps you might get a disease. Disease is a natural way that levels the system, right? Or, and this is the or, animal change or behavioral change. So what happened with my fields is that at first we got more grazing, and then new plants came which started breaking up those invasive grasses. They started taking over and new things would go. So we had something called silverweed, which would break up the large grasses, allowing more light to the ground, which gave the same opportunities to the weaker species that, let's say, a grazing animal might have done. Isn't nature very sophisticated? And to think it needs to be coddled by us. Because that's the problem I have with everybody. Everybody feels that we need to manage, to control. And do you know what the funny thing is? If you're trying to control, if you're trying to manage, you're gardening. And gardening is the method of the mad. You are fighting the tide against nature to force a reaction. So you are struggling against a downwards power. You're never going to win against nature, and yet you try. That's what insane people do. So I don't like gardening much. I like wilding. So anyway, I began to think about these concepts. And one day I was walking the woodlands. And I heard someone cutting down a tree. And I was like, son of a bitch, can't cut down my tree. We have a no tree cutting policy here. So I pulled out my Samsung phone. Tried to call the police. No signal. Why? It's a Samsung phone. They never work. Anyway, so I said, right, I'm on my own. So it's time to do the Conor McGregor thing. So I was like, okay, I'm ready for a fight. Hopefully they're not bigger than me. So I came running. Hey, you! Can't cut down my tree. And I burst through the bushes. And there was no one there. And I said, oh, shit. I've gone mad. I've been rewilded. Oh, shit. And then I saw it. Movement in the bushes. And a giant stag coming, charging and smashing into a tree. And I stopped. And then another one came out of the bushes. Smash into the same tree. And I did what anybody would do. I had a stupid look on my face. And I kept watching it, and they were taking turns. The one would go, hit the tree, and then the other one would go. And I'm not talking about this David Attenborough bullshit where you get a deer and it's kind of like scraping its horns. No, I'm not talking that. I'm talking Warner Brothers. Smash. That's what I was watching. And I looked, and at that moment they noticed me. And then there was a moment, like a cowboy film. Mexican standoff. I was ready to go. Hands moving. Don't want to spook the bastard. And it looked at me, and I looked at it. I was like, Pilgrim, it's not your day. And I went for my Samsung phone, because I'm a vegan, and I pulled out my Samsung phone. You need to do the swiggly thing. Do you still have the swiggly thing with Samsung phones? I had to do the swiggly thing. It was wet, so it was like a slightly mushed wiggly thing. Didn't get it, so I'd do it again. Nope. Third time, now I need a fucking pin. Oh, for fuck's sake. And I started doing my pin, and I took the most epic picture of a slightly blurry bum of a deer running away. Shit. That's not going to look good on Instagram unless I said it's avant-garde art. That might be a stretch. So I said, okay, well, that was weird. Okay, well, nobody will ever believe me. And I went. And as time went on, I began noticing that trees were disappearing from the forest. And in fact, I'd be walking and I'd stub my big toe and I'd say all kinds of profanity. Who put this there? And then I thought to myself, my employees are screwing with me. So I went to the farmyard where Jerry works. Now, Jerry, he's a former prison officer. Big guy. He's got hands like bananas. And I said, Jerry, how's it going? Fine. I was like, have you been doing some extra work, Jerry? Some conservation? What? I'm like, I've been cutting trees, Jerry. What kind of trees? Cherry laurel, Jerry? Because that's what they were. And he goes, what would I do that for? And then he got kind of offended. And I thought, oh shit, he got offended. He thinks I'm saying he's stealing. I'm not saying that. And he goes, Lord Dunsany. Oh, Jesus, I am in trouble. He only calls me Lord Dunsany when he's angry. Lord Dunsany, you're the meanest boss I ever had. Why would I go and cut down those invasive trees? They're not worth anything. And I'm like, don't hit me. Don't hit me. Oh, okay, so I guess that's a good point. So you didn't cut down the trees? No. Okay, fine. It turns out the deer were removing these trees. It was the cherry laurel. And in Ireland, cherry laurel and rhododendron are the two most destructive trees they're invasive. They came from Eastern Europe. They are destroying our natural forest because they grow like a wall. They're great for hiding your ugly neighbor from your eyes. So people plant them because in Ireland we hate our neighbors. It's a thing. Like, not like you guys here. You guys are friendly. Like, we're not. We're like, what the hell is that bollocks doing looking at me? We don't like our neighbors. We want to have walls of invasive plants to stop them. If we could have that barbed wire that they have in Israel, we would get that, but we're not allowed that. So we want to have these invasive trees. But the problem was these invasive trees have destroyed most of our forestry. And in fact, they're very difficult because if you cut them, they release cyanide into the air. Oh, yeah. And you can't really kill them. So what you have to do is you have to, like, cut them and then inject poison, ideally from Monsanto or DuPont. Not exactly the greatest people ever. And then you got to get rid of them. Because if you go at them with a chainsaw, there's a very good chance, and recent studies have shown this, that poison is excreted into the root system and can kill the land underneath for years. They even say that if you're going to cut your invasive bushes, you should be wearing a mask. I tell nobody this, because the types of people who are planting rhododendron bushes and cutting them are the types of people we could do less with. So if you see a big red-faced farmer and he's cutting his lawn, say nothing. The world will have done with them fairly soon. I know it's terrible. You've got another at least 45 minutes of this. Anyway, So the deer started doing it. Now, this was bizarre. They were stripping it. They were breaking the branches. Now, if a plant like that is so powerful, so destructive, so invasive, how do you get rid of it? If you have such aggressive protections, and it's like the Terminator of plants, how do you do it? You weaken it. If you strip the branches, if you take the leaves off, it drowns. It starts to deteriorate. What I noticed is that where the trees would die, fungus would set in and almost break down the tree immediately. And in fact, huge areas of the forest were being cleared, and it was targeted. Now, I should say something. Deer do not eat cherry laurel. In fact, they've never touched it. And I talked to every employee I had. My oldest employee has been there since 1980, and until the last 6 years, that has never happened before. And it's happening in 7 of the forests. And they're stripping land, taking the trees, sometimes pulling them out of the forest. Now, the only animal that I've seen that pulls trees out and will remove them from areas are elephants. And I assure you, we don't have elephants yet. So they are doing this, and it's targeted. And in fact, our cherry laurel is receding. And our rhododendron, there is 1 tree left. So the government of my country spends 1.5 million on controlling these trees, these 2 trees, and they do it badly. And I have spent nothing. And in fact, I know what you're thinking. That guy's going to be rich. I'm going to be knocking Trump off Time magazine. It's going to be me and 2 deer. Making all the money because I'm going to rent the deer out to all the national parks. Look. It's going to be me. But no, joking aside, this is happening all the way through Dunsany. 7 of the 9 forests that we have. And do you know why it's not happening in the other 2 forests that we have? Because there's no cherry laurel in those forests. And my neighbor, who has cherry laurel, untouched. My other neighbor, who has cherry laurel, untouched. It only happens inside us. And just to prove it, we have video footage. We had a girl do an entire paper on it. And I checked with universities. I even checked on Google to see if there was any other examples in which deer had done this. No. Computer says no. No examples. I checked with the universities. I've checked in the UK. No examples of deer attacking cherry laurel and destroying it. Now, like I said, it's poisonous. So what are we looking at here? We are watching a restored ecosystem. Because remember, forests are cities. The importance of a forest. What makes a good society? You need young people, you need old people, you need grumpy people, you need ugly people. That's called variety. It's called biodiversity. And in systems required, because the young have enthusiasm, the old have experience. Right? You know what happens in those tree plantations? You have those here, right? Lot of plantations full of trees, pines. You probably walked around those, yeah? They never work, and they're full of diseases, and then pests get in. Do you know why they don't work? No variety, no variables, no diversity. And one other thing, those are a school. You know what happens? Any teachers in here, by the way? Anyone in education? Don't worry, I'm not going to make you say or do anything funny. Just a hand up. No educators here. Seriously? Oh, one over there. What happens if you were to let the children run the place? Nothing much. Well, I'll tell you. All the girls would be pregnant by Friday. That's what would happen. It would be a frickin' disaster. And that's why we don't let the kids run the riot, right? That's why we need people like you to stop them from doing all that sort of stuff. Don't worry, you can't cancel me. My internet barely works, so I wouldn't even notice. So anyway, so if you have a school, which is what those plantations are, you have a disaster. Why we need and why strong old ecosystems are able to be resilient against disease is because you have rot. Circle of life, remember? You have age, you have dead things, you have young things, and you have all the levels in between. That means you have all the best. Remember that a forest is a system, and the systems of nature work in unison. We are not seeing everything. We are seeing part of a tapestry. When you realize that you are but a thread in the tapestry. Life becomes a lot easier. You realize that we do not have to have all the answers. We have to be part of the picture, not the center part of the picture. And those systems are resilient. Do you know that my estate has the oldest elm trees? You heard of elm? Elm are almost completely extinct in Ireland. The only elm trees that survived in Ireland, the only elm trees that have survived in my place, were where? Deep in the woods. Because trees and plants, they will fight together for the betterment of the system. They don't work. Plants do not work as singles. They work as systems. We in society also work as systems, sometimes pretty badly in systems. Anyone who's dealt with local government will agree with that. But that is the essence. So we have to have systems. And when we allowed the lack of management to happen, the first thing that happened is no more chemicals. Then we allowed rot to happen, which means fungus. Remember that all these years that we've had animals, there was grazing. That means antibiotics. That means genetically modified feeds getting excreted into the ground. Every time it would rain, that would poison the soil. Now, these chemicals do not destroy the mycelium, but they inhibit the mycelium. That means it's like trying to give directions to your mate on WhatsApp. Oh yeah, you turn left, and if you see a church, you've gone too far. But that's when it's all slurring and everything. That is what your mycelium is struggling with. It's like trying to give bad directions on a WhatsApp phone call, although you guys have mega internet here. But back where I am at, you practically need to send carrier pigeons out to communicate with your neighbor. So the reality of it is, when we started rewilding, recycling became the main thing. We began to see changes, animals. We began to see flow. And then what happened was we began to see changes in the forest. And those changes meant that the mycelium was becoming healthier again. It was coming back online. And that system became stronger, more resilient. We started resisting the likes of ash dieback. You know that the ash tree, Acer? What he said, is the second fastest regenerator in Dunsany today. And they appear to be resilient against disease. What does that tell you? The system is back online and we're open for business. Why? Because we decided to do something different. We decided to do vegan rewilding. We accepted the fact that we ourselves are but a system. We have to be part of nature. The only way that we truly restore nature, we're not going backwards. We're not going to be able to go back to this bygone old era. We have to look forward. If you spend your time looking backwards, you're going to trip on the present, you're going to fuck up the future. Or you look back for inspiration. You look forward to a new future. So how does that come back to rewilding and veganism? If we want equality, if we want real change, it starts with us changing our value system. And this is coming out of a guy who is a beneficiary of the current system. That's right. Evil landlords and all that stuff, me. But even I know, just because we've always done it doesn't mean there's any future in it. And let's look at our decisions. We've brought ourselves to the brink of destruction, ecological collapse. All as a result of being able to create fire and thus having a crazy ride. So what do we go back? Do we go back into the woods? No. We've taken the lessons we learned. We do not apologize. We go forward. We change the mindset. But we must start thinking about nature. And the way to truly be part of the system is to become what we were supposed to be. Plant-eating creatures who exist as part of the system. How do we do this? The first thing, we have to make the tough decision. We have to eat what we were supposed to eat. Over time, I mean, how many people here have thought their mind and bodies changed when they changed to a plant-based or vegan diet? Because I can tell you me, I was an angry person. I hated everything. And here I am today, and I'm a happy bastard. More or less. And that's with a house full of women. And the truth of the matter is, generations of eating the wrong foods have changed us. So it may take generations to change back. And I'm saying we have to consider this. There's more to veganism that hypnotized me. We want to live the best life we can live. But that means you have to give. Because remember, yin yang, give and take. We have to change the way we value. Because people talk about biodiversity. So the first thing they say is, oh, well, we have to plant loads of oaks. Oh, we have to do a bit of this. We need more heavy predators. That's always the thing I hear. And I'm like, no, what we need is a balance in the system. We have to stop looking at things as value, as, oh, one of these is worth 5 of those. Because, you know, it's the same mind muscles that go, you know what? I don't like black people. You know what? If you're a woman, you're worth less than a man. You know what? If you come from a place that has sand, you can't be my friend because you're something, something. It's very easy because we've been conditioned over generations to put people in boxes. And just because you have a tick box system, oh, we have to have so-and-so and so-and-so in my office, that is bullshit. That's not going to work because that hasn't gotten to the root of the problem. The root of the problem is how we are brought up, how we have seen the world. We have to change that mindset. So what does that mean? That means we have to start letting nature back in. Why we have to start thinking about the things that we've learned. All those lessons. If you leave it alone, you'll change into forest. Well, that's one. In my estate, we have a lot of grasslands. And some grasslands are quickly turning into forests. But some have had no natural tree regeneration. Isn't that funny? And the first thing you might say is, oh, because you have deer. No, the deer are everywhere. The truth of the matter is just because people have said it doesn't make it so. And that we have to ask the questions. The basis of my project, and what I really had the epiphany moment, is I realized that I am one of the enemy. And I have the ability, more than most, to create knowledge. Because if you have any understanding of how science works, science is for sale. If you want to get some research paid for, you got to kiss some ass. You got to say the right things to the right people. Now, who are the right people? Some guy in a suit who probably sells something. So are you going to ask the right questions to get the money? Or are you going to say the uncomfortable truth? Because if I tell you, you know, nature doesn't need much, like the same way medicine, you know, you feel a bit sick, have some sunshine, have some rest, and eat some garlic. I don't know if the pharmaceutical companies will be too happy with that. So we will invent things to appease the people funding us. So we have to deconstruct that. Our approach has always been homeopathic. If we can create the knowledge, we can have the knowledge to make better decisions. That's the plan. So that was my big choice. I decided that Dunsany was the most important science experiment in favor of a completely different approach to nature conservation. And since we've started, we've returned umpteen animals, we in high numbers. We have changed the mindset of many people in Ireland. When I started, the young people weren't even vegetarian. I lecture at school now, and I was in a rural community, 30% vegetarian. And I asked a kid who was 8 years old, "You're vegetarian? What do your parents do?" "Sheep farmer." Dinners must be tense. But the truth is, it's changing. It's electric. The thing is, all we need is it's one grain of grass, one little amount, and it starts to ignite. Because the funny thing is, it's almost as if it's true. And that we've been living the lie because the matrix is beginning to crack. And we're beginning to see through the lies. Our entire society was built on lies. I hate to say it. Many of those lies were perpetuated by the people like me. But the reality of it is, just because we've done it, doesn't mean there's any future in it. So when people talk to me about nature, they talk to me about their nonsense. Hunters talking about we need to control. It's amazing when people tell me about hunters. Because they say, oh, but we need to control the deer. But let me tell you something about deer. Do you know how deer breed? Deer breed at rutting season. So the big ones start howling. They fight the little ones. And the biggest winner is the one that gets the girls. Now, I don't know about you, but, you know, I'm getting old. And after a few times, I'm not quite like I used to be. but I'm still bigger than some of the younger ones. And it's the same. Because one massive deer might be able to impregnate a few. But when you kill that massive beast, suddenly you've got 20. So the more you hunt, the more you have a problem. We've been culling, in my country, massive culls for the last 20 years. And you know what? The deer problem has gone out of control. There was 72,000 deer slaughtered in Ireland last year. And you know what they said? We're going to have to do 80,000 this year. So, do the same thing over and over again, expect a different result. What do they say? You're feckin' bonkers, mate. That's what it is. So how about a different thing? We've killed no deer, yet we have more regeneration than ever. Our animals are doing well, and there's balance in the system without a bullet fired. So what happens when they start to breed too much? Well, there was an island off the coast of Ireland run by monks. And this island was abandoned by the monks, and they left the monastery and the deer on the island. And nobody went there for 30 years. Now, I can't remember the name, unfortunately. Otherwise, I will send it to you, and you can pass it on if anyone's asking. Now, this island was abandoned for 30 years, and after 30 years, people returned. And you know what they found? The deer numbers had balanced, and a forest had started growing. What happened? Equilibrium. That's what happened. They found a balance. So I'm not saying that that will happen the same in every situation. I couldn't say that. But I can say that there is a lot more to the puzzle than what they've been telling us. So the interesting thing with rewilding is this became a thing for me, and I realized that there was magic behind it. But then I thought to myself, well, I'm doing all this stuff and the science and stuff. But you know what the problem is? I haven't even solved any of the issues. I'm a failure. And then I realized something. People only change. They can only change about 20%. People can only handle 20%. If you tell everybody that they have to completely transform, there's a knee-jerk. Have you ever tried to convert non-vegans into vegans? Try and tell them that everything they believed in was bullshit? It's hard. You try and tell them, oh, you know what? Have a bit of this vegan burger. It ain't bad. Oh, it's good for your health. Oh, it's pretty good. What happens? They slowly start going, oh, okay, I'll do plant-based on Mondays, they say, and so on, so on, so on. 20%. That's what Hollywood's actual ratio is for making movies. Those unwatchable movies that we watch at the cinema, they always change 20%. That is the actual model that Paramount does right now. So 20%. So I realized something. We have to create the information to make better choices. Nature itself does work. It doesn't matter what people have said, because you can't take that as fact. But then I realized something. We have to play to the rules that we have been governed by, because the world was shaped by men like white men who've controlled everything. Economics, money, these are commodity systems are not going to change overnight. So how do we create nature? You know Rockefeller, I'm sure you've heard of him. Rockefeller's, one of his greatest moments, if you like these kinds of corporate things, was when corporations were given rights. Because up till the 20s, corporations had to be in the public good. And after a certain period of time, they had to be wind down. Rockefeller's biggest achievement was when he was able to lobby to change the laws of the United States that corporations did not have to do things in the public benefit. Thus, the corporation war began. So they became rights, they got more, I would argue, more rights than you. So how do we solve nature? We need to create a value for nature. We need to give legal protections to nature. How do we do that? Unfortunately, value. We have to use the same weapons that the system has used on nature for years. We have to use the same ones. We have to create a value. We have to create commodity, unfortunately. So we started developing things with a group called BioNua. Because what we wanted to do is create a value system. How do I get every landowner in the place to get rid of their animals and start doing nature? Imagine if we had rewilding everywhere. So do you know what the solution was? Franchising, like Burger King. So we created a system. The system was this vegan rewilding, or as I like to call it, V-wilding template. We created a basis of study scientists, research. We are doing satellite research on Dunsany. Every 2 days, a satellite flies over Ireland and measures seismic data. We discovered that in Ireland, between 4 and 6 tons of carbon is sequestered by grasslands. That's government numbers, right? We took our tests, and do you know what we found in 2021? Do you know what the average is in Dunsany? So 4 to 6 tons in grasslands in Ireland, forests in Ireland about 8 to 10 tons, and peatlands or boglands about 18 plus. Do you know what we found in ours? The average in our place has hit 19.5 tons. All of this because of a little rewilding. Very impressive. So how does that turn in? The EU has brought in all kinds of laws now. Governments are now forcing corporations to do carbon accounting, and in the next few years they will have to pay for that. So carbon is bullshit. It is not a real thing. It's made up. In the reality, it has no benefit because you can pay a Swiss company today to manufacture carbon for you out of using a machine. It has no nature benefits. So we created a new system called the biodiversity credit system. The idea, and this is a template, is to create a system in which nature is valued on its organic abilities. This is broken down into 3 aspects: animals, biodiversity, and what's under the ground, and based on carbon absorption. We create a system that people can buy. So they are now investing like a crop. Every year they can invest in this. So we're using the same weapons that were used on the system, back on the system, to benefit nature. Because once nature becomes valuable to people, you'll be very quick to see how quickly people protect it. So what we are doing at the moment, we've already sold our first bunch of credits. We have 5% of Coffee Angel's profits going in to this biodiversity credit system. We are the flagship. We have 19 other projects starting this now. And in my lifetime, I hope there to be 9,000. Now we start to value nature. Now we start to protect nature. Unfortunately, it's not going to solve all our problems, but it's a good start. And the reality of it is, just like the corporations, nature will be protected because we will demand it, because it will be worth something to people. And if we start with a no-holds-barred way of measuring nature, not sugar-coated for the benefits of government. This is not a government thing. I've never taken a penny from the government, so thus I'm in nobody's pocket. This is to create a system of open market in which we dictate the value, because the value is based on science, not on ideologies or benefits to the government. It's only based on nature's commodities itself. So thus, we are creating a new template, a new idea that we can trade. So when I say to a farmer, get rid of your animal agriculture, they don't turn to me and go, well, what do I make money on? I'm going to say, biodiversity, nature. Let nature pay your bills and not the suffering of others. That is how you destroy the animal agriculture industry, bit by bit. And that's what we hope to do.